Uncharted, the movie, is something I thought I would hate going into it, but somehow ended up liking it. Now, that's not to say it's a good movie, because it isn't, but I did find it fun at certain points. So let's talk about why, after an 11-hour workday, I decided to spend $30 on a movie that I thought I would hate. I recently reviewed Uncharted 2 on the main channel because it's one of my favorite games of all time. If you haven't checked out that video, I highly recommend it since the algorithm isn't pushing it because YouTube hates whenever you try to do something new. But since that video is tangentially related to this video, I thought it would be fitting to review the movie. So, Uncharted. It's a movie that's lived in development hell for well over a decade now. And for something that couldn't seem to escape the flux of being in and out of production, it's amazing that this movie even exists in the first place. Yet being in awe of a movie existing doesn't necessarily make it good. I think that's why it dropped in February, which is usually a death sentence to anything that isn't a chick flick or a rom-com. And I've been a longtime fan of the series, so I was going to see it on opening night. The plot of this film is Victor Sullivan recruits Nathan Drake to help him find the lost ships of Magellan and his crew, with pirate gold amounting to several $1 billion to be had. See, Sully was hunting for the gold, but needs to pick up on the trail from clues Nate's brother Sam may have left him. At the same time, Santiago Moncada is searching for the treasure, believing it's his birthright, as a race to secure artifacts, solve puzzles, and find the gold ensues. First thing you might notice off the bat is there are a lot of retcons in this movie. Like, quite a few, and some pretty big plot points from the game. Mainly, Nate's ring, which is pretty much relevant to this story, and how Nate and Sully actually met, which is kind of relevant since that's pretty much the crux of this whole movie. But oddly enough, you sort of have a strange hodgepodge of all four main Uncharted games. You have the introduction of the characters like the first, you have the first half being a flashback structure like the second, you have the plane scene and the swindling deals of the third, and you have the most influence from the fourth game being pirate treasure, the auction scene, and most obviously the inclusion of Sam. As an adaptation, the film seems a little jumbled, and you can certainly tell pacing-wise just because of how plot points play out. However, what's more important to me in the audience is that if an adaptation can manage to maintain the spirit of the original and not be a one-to-one carbon copy. Movies that do this well are Jurassic Park and The Lord of the Rings. See, video game movies have sort of been considered unadaptable until relatively recently, where Detective Pikachu and the Sonic movie seem to dispel that curse. And while Uncharted is nowhere near as unwatchable as some previous video game movies, and also nowhere near as good as something like Detective Pikachu or probably even the Sonic movie, it does fall in that middle section, probably closer to the latter two, kind of feeling painfully average. It's hard because Uncharted was really the first in a series of games from Naughty Dog that played into the idea that video games could be like interactive movies. So the film adaptation, no matter what was done, was always going to be inferior. And I remember when Mark Wahlberg was initially cast as Nathan Drake, and I was like, what? No! Because that seemed like a horrible decision back then. And if there's one good thing about this movie, it's that that did not play out. Now, it's unfortunate that he had to fill the role of Sully, because he stuck around to the project like he was fused to it at the hip, but now's the perfect time to talk about the cast. The three main stars of this movie are mostly horribly miscast. Let's talk about Tom Holland. He's no doubt a better choice for Nate over Mark Wahlberg, but I feel like he was just cast because he's trendy right now, and he likes playing video games with Jacksepticeye. Even though he's taller than me at 5'9" and definitely has the body for this role, maybe, he just doesn't have the face. I don't want to be too scathing with my critique of him because I did enjoy the Spider-Man movies, and I understand he probably wants to be in different roles sort of like this so that he isn't typecast to be the nerdy kid, but I just don't see him as tall, dark, and handsome Nathan Drake. It could be his baby face. It could be the fact that he looks like he has a frog in his mouth every time he's trying to say something serious. I don't know, it's so weird, because he has the facial expressions, and you can see some flares of his charisma in a few scenes, but it's not greater than the sum of its parts. See, I learned in the dark days of high school theater, because of how I look, because of my stature, because of things outside of my control, right? I was only going to get certain roles regardless of how my acting or singing abilities were. Now, you can get mad about that, and believe me, I was for quite a bit for some things, right? For some roles that I was really passionate about. But sometimes you just have to make the best with what you're dealt with. You can't force yourself into being in roles you don't fit well in. And while Tom Holland is certainly trying, you can see that it doesn't really work well well for this movie. I cannot say the same thing for Mark Wahlberg as Sully, though. Every single scene he's in, he just looks like he's phoning it in. There's no emotion in his eyes, he just feels like he's a plank of wood, floating from scene to scene, just waiting to collect a paycheck. It sucks because there are so many other actors who could play the swindling, cigar-smoking badass character and would be fine growing a mustache for the role, other than Mark Wahlberg. But because he knows that he was originally cast in this film, he doesn't care. And it's so weird because even when he's in scenes with the other actors, whether they know each other or not in this canon, he still doesn't care. Sophie Taylor Ali does a pretty alright job at young Chloe and manages to find some chemistry with Tom Holland, but it's just hard because you're not really learning anything more about these characters' past histories. And I honestly feel like this movie just exists in a pocket universe where all the Uncharted concepts are meshed together, right? But I didn't really see that for the side characters, though. Antonio Banderas does a really good job as the antagonist for this movie. There's a twist villain who's super obvious and literally dresses like an enemy stand user, so you're gonna know who it is right away. There was this guy with a Scottish accent whose gimmick was that he was big and fat and talked really fast.
You come out to play with the big boys, Ian, because you're about to get a proper Scottish welcome.
What?
And I don't know, that's turn off your brain kind of funny. There were some pretty normie jokes though too, like Sully being on Tinder, which weirdly enough is plot relevant. Also Sully having a cat, which just isn't Sully. See, where the Uncharted movie quote-unquote fails is that it's not willing to do its own thing, and it just plays into the tropes of its inspirations like Indiana Jones, which is explicitly mentioned in a scene taken straight out of The Last Crusade. And all that made me think was, man, I'd rather really be watching that film right now because it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But it's kind of sad to see the characters who were gifted with such rich and interesting backstories and motivations from the games, and only about 40% of it made it into this movie. Like I said, I'm not expecting 100% recreation, because when you do that, it's always going to be done worse, which is why I refuse to this day to watch Disney's new The Lion King. And when some of the original concepts and themes make it into the movie, they actually deliver fairly well on them. Also, I was a little disappointed with Uncharted having such a great soundtrack. Nate's theme only played 3 times, very briefly, and 2 of them were remixes. But even with these negatives, I still kind of really enjoyed the movie. If you can get past the retcons of the game's canon, the opening is pretty alright until Nate meets Sully, then it sort of drags a bit too long in New York. See, part of the appeal of Uncharted is that you're going to places outside of the States, places that you really wouldn't get to see. That's why even though it's very, very similar to the auction scene from the 4th game, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like a black market affair when it's in the middle of downtown New York instead of secluded Italy. But once they're in Barcelona and the setting feels like Uncharted again, then you sort of really get into the movie. Yeah, there's some real shaky dialogue during some of these moments, but more or less I can look past some of that. When Nate initially meets Chloe, there's a scene where his voice gets so high, like it almost cracks, and that totally isn't Nathan Drake at all, but I don't know if it was an intentional decision from the director to make him seem younger or not. Either way, it's really stupid. And a lot of this movie is really stupid. The finale is basically what was shown in the trailers, just the action set piece isn't just a pirate ship. No, we gotta have 2 500-year-old pirate ships airlifted by helicopters through the jungle island and have the characters jumping between the 2 of them, blowing up stuff, and it's ridiculous. It feels like a video game, which, you know, it's fitting for a movie that's based off of a video game. But that's not even the best part for me. There were certain scenes that stuck out. I liked the effects for the most part. They were really well done, and I appreciate that Tom Holland did them himself. There were a lot of callbacks to lines from the games, too, and they fit pretty well in the scenes they were in. I liked the way Nate would swindle around a little bit, and it sort of harkened back to his persona from Uncharted 2 and 3. I like that Nate in this movie is always taking a swig of whatever alcohol is available at the time. I mean, that seems very fitting for a younger, less mature version of Nate. But one scene, oh my god, it made me and the entire theater laugh out loud. And that was Nolan North's cameo, the original Nathan Drake. Oh my god, he literally stole the show. and he only had 2 lines. Another reason I really liked the movie is that there was no really obvious agenda pushed in it, which is kind of good because that was never the point of the Uncharted games. You know, the movie, like the games, focused on the adventure, and it gives the historical inspirations the reverence that they deserve, like the church in Barcelona. And there was a really funny play where the characters figuratively descend into hell and they end up in a nightclub and seem to be out of place, but it's little things like that that actually like really resonate with me. The characters don't take it too seriously either, which is good for the majority of the movie, but when there are dramatic moments between Sully and Nate, they fall way flat. And there's a bit of puzzle solving in the film, which is appreciated, but very little foreshadowing to the big reveals at the end. So, I don't know. All the answers are right there for you. They're just gonna tell you all of the answers from the Grail Diary. Excuse me. I mean Sir Francis Drake's diary. Oh crap, I mean the Magellan Diary. But despite these flaws, it was nice to enjoy a movie that just wanted to sort of tell a fun story, even if it made no sense at all. So personally, I would recommend watching Uncharted because there's nothing better right now, and it's not so bad it's good because it has enjoyable moments there. It's kind of average, but I think you'll get your money's worth out of it. I tried to go in with an open mind. Hell, this was the first movie I think I've ever seen in IMAX. And at its best, it feels like a totally passable action-adventure film. Little too familiar, but it's okay. At its worst, it feels like Uncharted enthusiasts doing above-average cosplay. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you leave a like on this video, and make sure you go back to the main channel and watch the Uncharted 2 video because I put a lot of time and effort into it. Thank you all for watching. This has been Shuck, and I'll catch you all later.